Hi, everyone. Today I wanted to go over when do you know when to use which UX research method. So there's about 20 research methods listed here on the Nielsen Norman website. And I kind of wanted to talk through when exactly you use which UX research method. And to do so, I'll be going over three different context and criteria to analyze the framework. And so there's attitudinal versus behavioral. So what people say versus what they do. There's qualitative versus quantitative, where you talk about why versus how many and how much. And there's context of when exactly do you use the product. And so looking at this graphic, we can see the behavioral and attitudinal axis, the qualitative and quantitative axis, and then the context indicated in green, red, yellow, and blue below. And so starting off with the qualitative and behavioral quadrant, we see there's field studies, usability testing, and remote moderated testing, and eye tracking. And I'll be going over each of these more specifically in a bit. In regards to attitudinal and qualitative, there's interviews and focus groups. There's desirability studies, participatory design, and customer feedback. There's card sorting and tree testing. There's diary studies, and there's concept testing. And in quantitative and attitudinal, there's surveys. So again, what is the attitudinal versus behavioral dimension? Again, this is what people say versus what people do. So if you're looking at what people say, you may want to look at card sorting or information architecture, as well as surveys. And focus groups can also give you more information about what people say. If you're looking at what people do or the behavioral dimension, you may want to do it A/B testing or eye tracking, which are surefire ways to figure out what exactly are people doing when looking at these products. And again, you can use usability studies and field studies for both attitudinal and behavioral, but they do tend to lean a little towards the behavioral side. Now looking at qualitative versus quantitative. So I mentioned that qualitative is figuring out why people do things, and you can use interviews and other tools to probe on people's behaviors to get at the why people do things. For quantitative methods, it tends to be more mathematical and larger studies in nature. You recruit more participants, and you can use more analytics tools, statistics, for example, to analyze your data. So, really quickly, kind of going over this behavioral, attitudinal, qualitative, and quantitative matrix. We have what people do versus what people say. And then we have on the qualitative versus quantitative side, why and how to fix versus how many and how much. And so there's four different contexts you might want to use a product. There's the natural context, the scripted context, the limited context, and the decontextualized context. So a natural context is used when you want to see what people do in their most natural habitat. And so you would use a natural use when you do ethnographic studies. And for a scripted study, you would want to script it so that you are looking at a specific area, or you may want to reproduce consistency. And so that's when you might want to use a scripted context. Limited methods are used when you're looking at just one specific aspect of a study. And so you're just using that specific use case. And decontextualized context is when you're not asking about usage or usability, but you are interested in potentially the study of the brand or something broader than just usage and usability. And going into phases of product development, this is important to know what kind of research you are conducting. So if you are at the strategize phase of product development, you're going to be doing generative research methods. And oftentimes you would be using field studies, diary studies, interviews, potentially surveys or participatory design, or concept testing. For the design phase of development, we would use formative research methods, which are aimed at improving the usability of design specifically. And in this case, you could use card sorting to improve our information architecture, tree testing, usability testing, or remote testing. And for remote testing, you can conduct both moderated and unmoderated interviews. After the design phase is the launch and assess phase. And this is when you're trying to measure the product performance specifically. And these are called summative research methods. And this is where you might want to use usability benchmarking, unmoderated UX testing, A/B testing, clickstream and analytics, and/or surveys. And although UX research is not an exact science, our aim is to improve the UX experience or the user experience. And so the classifications above are just meant to help you make the best choice. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer, but there are better choices than others. And so I'm going to quickly describe each of the UX research methods we went over today. The first is usability testing. And so these are one-on-one tests with a researcher, where a researcher often gives a specific scenario and tasks, and then they ask questions about that specific product or service. Field studies are when you look at participants in their own environment, and you want to create the most realistic specific scenario. Contextual inquiry is similar to field studies, where researchers and participants are working together to figure out and observe specific nature of tasks in their realistic habitat. Participatory design is when you are given design elements or creative materials in order to construct ideal experiences and trying to figure out the why and what matters most to them. Focus groups are bigger than usability tests because they often include 3 to 12 participants, and they're often discussion. Interviews, again, are one-to-one experiences where you tackle in-depth questions about a specific topic. Eye tracking is when you use an eye tracking device to see where people are looking, which could help see what people look at first on websites and what draws people's attention and in what order it draws it. Usability benchmarking is when you are trying to find usability improvements and you're trying to find a benchmark. And you often run a lot of participants to establish a benchmark. Remote moderated testing is when you conduct usability studies remotely. And there's a lot of tools that can aid in this. For example, user testing, user Zoom, Qualtrics. And so this comes in handy, especially in the era of COVID. Unmoderated tests are helpful when you want to conduct a large amount of people and you don't have enough researchers to conduct moderated tests. So you would ask automated questions to participants. And these, again, can be both quantitative and qualitative in nature. Concept testing is when you haven't launched a product yet and you're trying to determine if a product meets the needs of the target audience. So you capture the essence of a product and then you test that concept. Diary studies are studies that tend to be longitudinal in nature, and you want to record different aspects of people's lives and see what changes over a period of time. Customer feedback is when you're just collecting information about the specific product and seeing what people say about it. Desirability studies are alternatives to different visual designs. And so you're trying to figure out what do people desire in these situations. Card sorting is helpful if you want to figure out how people organize information and what groups do they categorize it into. And this is important for establishing mental models and creating information architecture. Tree testing is similar to card sorting, is when you're testing out the specific information architecture of a page. Analytics is when you are looking at clicks or form filling and seeing how often do people do things and trying to analyze that data. Clickstream analytics are figuring out how do people look at different sequences of pages and trying to figure out the specific information about clickstreams. A/B testing is when you're given different designs and ask users to interact with both of these designs to see different behaviors. Surveys are when you ask both closed-ended or open-ended questions, more often open-ended questions. Closed-ended questions. And this is helpful if you want to run a large amount of people and gain a lot of information and tend to be quicker than just moderated studies. Thank you for coming today. If you're interested, there is more information in these links on the Nielsen Norman website, and I'll see you in the next one.